The Oconee County Conservation Bank Board is called to order. Present today are Scuddy Walker, Emily Hitchcock, Laura Havern, and Ryan Keese. We have a quorum. The first order of business is approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Motion by Laura, second by Ryan. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. The second order of business is the treasurer's report. I apologize, I can't talk this morning. Laura?
Okay. The treasurer's report for the local government investment pool period ending July 31st, 2022. The monthly opening balance is $280,321.58. There were deposits of interest for reinvestment of $551.31. There were no expenditures, leaving a balance of $280,872.89. The treasurer's report for the Community First Bank account ending in 183 for the period ending August 31st, 2022. The monthly opening balance was $4,041 and no cents. There were no deposits, there were no expenditures, leaving a balance of $4,041 in the account.
Do we have a motion to approve the treasurer's report or accept the treasurer's report?
I make a motion.
Ryan?
Second.
Motion by Ryan, second by Scuddy. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. The next item is the fundraising and public relations report. And in Andy's absence, I will make a very abbreviated report. I did talk with a private citizen, Debbie DeBose, here in Oconee County, and Andrea Cooper and Alden Knight with Upstate Forever yesterday. And the purpose of the call was to discuss the whether or not Upstate Forever and Debbie could provide assistance in an endowment campaign. At the end of the call, after a far-ranging discussion, there was quite a bit of concern, and their recommendations were that there not be, first, that a goal of $5 million was way too much for a campaign. Secondly, that it would be extremely difficult to get large donations given this entity's existence as a board of the county council. So in light of that, they felt like that there should be another vehicle for fundraising. And we discussed several different ones that
Separate.
were
Separate from
from the
us.
board.
Okay.
Yeah. But no decisions were made. Everything else was kind of deferred. Everything actually was deferred to Andy's return, because he's going to be leading the fundraising and part of this report. So, but I just wanted y'all to know that that was the kind of experts were making those recommendations. They'll be meeting with Andy after he returns sometime in October, and then we'll know what the issues are. I mean, what the plan is or recommendations going forward.
Did they make a recommendation for, if not 5 million, how many, how much?
Well, they said for an initial one, 500,000 to $1 million, which would not be enough
No.
to fund an endowment.
Correct.
And so their kind of initial, my impression was that they were thinking funding an endowment is probably unrealistic and they all do fundraising
Right.
in this area.
Right.
So again, those are the kinds of things that they will discuss with Andy. And there are a couple of alternatives, maybe utilizing some existing, an existing organization, maybe creating one separate. But those are way past my
One of the, just from, so that you understand where we came up with the 5 million is, we were looking at how can we continue to fund the operation of the board? And, if we look at historically what we've done so far, it's about 200 to 250,000 a year that we seem to, be appropriating. Although this year we're going to be less.
Yeah,
But in order to fund from the interest of an endowment, 250,000, it was going to take 5 million to do that. That's where that number came
Right.
from. Can we get there? I don't know.
I don't know. So I think my impression from them, and I'm sorry, this is all secondhand, and I'm not a decision maker. Ultimately, the board will be, but I think Andy will come back with
Right.
specific recommendations. But my thought from them was, 500,000 to $1 million, if that could be raised, would fund 4 to 10 years or
Right.
whatever, and then you would do another campaign rather than trying to do an endowment.
Right.
We didn't get into too many specifics, but that seemed to be what they,
But won't
They
we
were
always
leaning
have
toward.
this conflict of interest, a potential conflict of interest, if us being under the county council and we raise 500,000 to $1 million, we put it into the interest-bearing account and we're using it the same way we're doing now, they're signing off on it.
okay, and that is one of their they were.
We're not really
leaning-
solving it, we're just sort of
No,
lessening
no.
the.
Well, they were leaning towards saying, spend down this money and let this organization be dormant, still have the meetings that were required, whatever, I think the minimum is 3 meetings a year, until such time as there was additional funding, and use whatever, anybody who is interested in fundraising would then do it through another organization who would actually issue grants where the same applicants that we consider would be able to apply for grants. But that is not going to work as long as we're a government agency. And we are.
I've always said I felt like that could hinder us from being able to, because it's set up for them to control us ultimately, which I know they're,
Yeah.
it's not been a problem, but
We
you know,
are.
you're subject to a
Yeah.
change in every council, you know?
So, so that's kind of where they're leaning, or where their recommendations were leaning. And so we'll just see, at some point in the next, my estimate is that we'll probably run out of money in about 3 years. I do think that based on some other meetings I was at where Chris Starker and Eddie's replacement, who's a very nice woman and whose name I cannot remember, both had kind of indicated to me that they have some applications in the pipeline, but it's very difficult if they're getting NRS money. They have to have an appraisal by somebody that meets that certification. And the other thing is surveyors are also backed up. So that they're, right now, we may suddenly get flooded with applications because as with everything in our world these days, there's a supply chain backup.
Believe me, they're backed up, and what they charge you when they can get to it is
Yes.
quite a bit more than what they were charging a year ago. 2 years
Yes, yes. So we don't know what impact that's going to have both on asks, on how much money people need, or whether or not people will be able to continue to go forward. But that gives us time to consider what the options are and decide, what we think is best for this organization. And then any of us on the board or any other people in the county who are interested in doing fundraising for this purpose can always go. There are a couple of other organizations, well, one that I know of, a land conservation fund, it has its own board. It's an independent creation. It accepts grants for, applications for grants. It makes grants to partially fund, provide matching dollars for other kinds of monies. It is administered by Upstate Forever staff to the extent that they might need support. But the board is not Upstate Forever, and it's not their staff, I don't think. So that, and they do have, and this is something new to me, they have a fund, and all of their monies are in Foothills Foundation, in the Land Conservation Fund account. And they do have a fund that is dedicated to be spent in Oconee County. So that is just, which I did not know. So that might be one mechanism where, anyone who's interested in participating in a campaign independent from the board. And they would, when we run out of money, they would just be an opportunity out there. It is, none of us were around when the ordinance was created or when the people that were working on this and wanted to see a mechanism in the county for funding grants made the decision not to do a 501c3, but to talk to the county about being a county entity. But this is where we are.
I think it's from the relationship going back to when Duke Power and Oconee County became kind of,
Yeah,
through everything that, to get relicensed. I think it had to be the way it was, I think. I don't.
it may be. And the next time Duke has a project that gets relicensed, it may be that this board gets another chunk, and then it announces and publicizes that it's again open for applications. It was in existence for a number of years before it had any money for applications. So it may be that the board will end up just kind of doing those kind of cycles. But anyway, in terms of public relations, Laura, and Brian, have y'all had anything?
No.
No activity?
Not since we've met or.
Okay. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the grant status. And what I would like is that the vice chair kind of assume that responsibility for working with Jennifer to maintain that report and to report every day. And I asked Scuddy, and he agreed that at least as long as he's the vice chair, he can assume those. So I'll turn it over to Scuddy to tell us if there's any report.
At this point, no changes, everything's still the same.
Okay. So there's nothing to vote on there. And Ryan, I forgot to add the donations report on the agenda. I'll make a note for that, but to your knowledge, were there any donations during the
No.
last? Okay. So now we're going to the discussion items. The first one is the discussion and action regarding the status of the ordinance amendment. There is no action. The ordinance was adopted as proposed by this board at, I can't remember which meeting, but it has been adopted, and so it is now in effect. And that is the reason why we have the next item on the agenda, which is the revision of policy 003 and the application for funding form. Because there were changes in the ordinance, there were things in both of those that needed to be revised. I'm not proposing that we vote on the policy today. I don't know if y'all have had a time to study it or if you have any questions. You'll notice that there are a lot of proposed changes, primarily because in addition to making the changes that were very limited, that might be required by the changes in the ordinance, David Root, the county attorney, had again encouraged me to get our policies as short as possible. So one of the things I wanted to do with this was for us not to vote on this policy until Andy returns, because he primarily drafted this policy.
Can I ask a question?
Uh-huh.
Is all the areas that are proposed to be changed or edited highlighted? Is that what all this,
In
is
the,
the highlighted sections?
in the grant procedures or in the application?
I'm looking in the application.
Okay, in the grant procedures, we're gonna get to the application in a
Okay.
second,
Oh, okay.
because that we may need to vote on.
Okay, so we don't have what you're looking at.
Oh, it was in the backup material.
I'm always
Okay.
trying to figure out
You
where
want me
people
to
are
pull
at.
up the backup material so it shows?
Yeah, can you? Because a lot of times I'm sort of like having to,
Okay,
I don't mean to sound stupid.
You tell me when to stop.
okay, I will. Okay. Well, go down to Exhibit B, because that's the one that shows the changes. Okay, so here you can see with the blue line, what's been deleted and what's been added in. And I don't know if y'all want to read it, or if you're ready to go to the next page, yeah, she'll just kind of scroll down. You'll see here in a few minutes that there's something in yellow. I think maybe it didn't come in yellow in the copy I sent to Jennifer. But there are a couple of things that I need to talk to David Root about. Because I have questions about our power to do it. And there's several things that I want to draw to Andy's attention. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it, there'll be another revision at the November meeting, and I do ask that everybody try to study that one, because that will probably be the one that we will be voting on.
Kind of like a final draft.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Now, on the application for funding, you do all have that in front of you. The stuff that is highlighted are the changes. And the first change, which is where we're advising the applicant that if they want to fund a fee simple, they have to put a conservation easement on it now. Of course, they can get more money for the fee simple because 10%, they get to do 10% of the cost of the project, not of the conservation easement value. So people may decide to do that. So that is just pointing that out because that's a new change. Then the second one, under the mandatory requirements, the ordinance now requires that lessees be notified as well as adjoining landowners. And it is now at the time of the application. You know how the ordinance used to say, you may not, because we haven't had very many applications, but the ordinance used to say they had to do it within 5 days of filing it or something. And we frequently had a problem with the timing of the letter. So now there's not a specific time. It's just when you're filing the application, notify everybody because they have 30 days to comment. So the idea is kind of it'll all go in the mail at the same time, hopefully. The next change is, this is related to the appraiser. And if there's no appraisal attached, then it has to be, a current appraisal has to be submitted prior to closing, but no later than 12 months. So that's just kind of making it clear that obviously you have to submit it prior to closing. But if they don't close within 12 months, if they ask for that 6-month extension, they still have to get it to us within the 12 months of when the council voted.
Just so you know, most appraisers have language that state that appraisal is valid in their opinion for 60 days, so it will require the appraiser to sign off on it again.
Okay.
They don't, appraisals aren't good for 12 months.
Yeah.
And that opinion's good for usually a window of like 60 days.
Well, I think the thought is that from our perspective, and from the ordinance perspective, is that this board is voting to issue a grant based on an appraisal at a date certain, knowing that the market may change, but we're not going to come back. And so whenever they get that, if they give it to us within that 60 days and it's valid,
fine.
then that is what the board and the council will use to calculate the award.
Gotcha.
And then the next one is that if they do submit an appraisal, that if it is more than 12 months old, again, this is, at the time county council approves, then the council will accept an updated letter. And so I use the language from the ordinance, and it's very long and cumbersome, but hopefully it gives the applicants some leeway there. And I guess it says that because they may not know, they won't know when the council votes, if they haven't done it before the council votes, then they have 30 days after the council votes, so that it's within that time frame of where the council would find it valid. So that was that change. The next one is, again, noting that there has to be a conservation easement. We will not be approving it, but it has to be there. In F, as we all know, we had this problem with the language of what is a small grant. So we were getting applications for 29.999 or whatever. So now it is, the small grant is defined as, it's not to be a small grant. Oh, I've got to change this. To be a small grant, the request must be no greater than 30,000 or 10%. So they can make an application for $30,000. I mean, this having to make it $1 below was kind of ridiculous, but that was the way it was worded. This was the intent. So that change was made. And then the next change is in D of the next section, 2D, which is on page 6. Flip over, and this just says that if there is a mortgage, the applicant or landowner has to certify that they have notified the lender that the mortgage will be subordinate to the conservation easement. And that will apply whether it's a fee simple or a conservation easement grant, because the fee simple will now have a conservation easement on it. And then on page 9, section 4, item 1I, little I. We have been asking about restoration plans, and now the ordinance requires it. If they come in and say, there was a trout stream that was dammed up, which I think somebody did, we're going to remove the dam, restore those trout waters, and that would have to be part of the application, and we would be able to provide points based on whether or not we thought the restoration plan was adequate. And then the next change is on page 13, item number 14. And this is because we had some issues, and we still have some issues with Natural Land Trust related to the transfer of the property interest and having to get this board's approval. So I just wanted to add this in. It's not a change in the ordinance, but I felt like it would be important to remind them again. They're told this in the grant application. In the grant agreement. They agree to it. But from the get-go, whatever interest you fund, you have to get the board's approval. And of course, it can only be transferred to an eligible recipient. So that's the reason that's in there. It's not because there was a change. And the one thing I did, and I hope I did it correctly, Laura, on the exhibit page 15, I added an S4-1 little I, plans for restoration. So that is those are the changes to the application. And this, I believe, does need to be approved if y'all are satisfied with it. Because if someone is planning to apply for the November cycle, it would be best if they used this application form. And I would, I guess I'll make the motion, since I know what I think we want. I will make a motion that we adopt the application for funding as presented in the backup materials, and ask the chair to meet with Jennifer to notify all of our current grant recipients that this will be the application going forward. Do I have a second?
I second.
Okay, so the motion was by Emily, second by Laura. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Okay, policy number 005. First, I'm going to make a motion to vacate this policy and the form application that was attached to it that is called request for approval to transfer property interest. Do I have a second for discussion purposes?
I second.
Okay. Motion by Emily, second by Laura. The background on this is that when Natural Land Trust received the letter, they had a number of concerns, and some of them were related to the content of this policy. And apparently, David Root and I had some miscommunications, and he had approved this policy, but there are things in it that he, in retrospect, has said, we do not have the power to do. So,
Who's we?
the board.
The board?
The board, yes, sorry. And one of them.
The county board or our board?
Our board
Okay.
does not have the power.
Okay.
And for example, one of them is to require that the deed include, the language we can include, but not that the subsequent buyer has to abide by the policies adopted by the Conservation Bank. We don't have the power to require them to put that in the deed. We have the power to require them to put in the deed that it's subject to provisions, and it has to be used for future conservation purposes. And there were some other things. It was a very, very lengthy telephone call. So they are still talking with David, I believe.
Meaning Nature Land Trust?
Natural Land Trust is still talking with David, is my understanding, about whether or not, based on a language in a letter agreement that the board and Natural Land Trust signed at the time okay, let me start up. The application was originally filed by Upstate Forever. And then they decided that Natural Land Trust was going to be the applicant. And so a request was done to make that transfer. It was approved and an agreement was signed. And based on the language in that, Natural Land Trust feels like they do not have to ask for permission to transfer the property. My understanding when we closed the meeting was that David Root says they do, still have to do it.
And Natural Land Trust's reasoning for that is because they weren't the initial applicant?
No, it's because in the agreement, and I don't have it in front of me, there was wording in the agreement that the board was was approving, it wouldn't be a conservation, anyway, there was something in that language that Natural Land Trust interprets to mean that we have pre-approved it go into the Forest Service. And David Root says, no, that is not what the language says. They get to talk about that. But one of Natural Land Trust's problems with filing an application or a request for approval to transfer the interest, as long as we have this policy out, is there are problems with the policy. So I told, and David agreed with me, that there were enough problems that I would recommend to the board that we vacate this policy and the attached form, and then revisit it. Not that, it will just, on the website, it will say something like being held for future policy or something.
They'll just have to take it off,
Oh, okay.
and then we can add the new one back.
Okay, and that's fine, and that will take some time. But I personally felt like there are issues with the policy. They're not comfortable filing a request as long as we have this policy because they can't comply with it, or don't want to because of those issues. That's easy to fix. As I said, David's position is that they still have to apply. We do not have an application today, so I will,
So the language, so I'm correct on this, the language that Andy specifically had inserted that stated we have a right to approve or not approve a transfer is not legally binding?
it is legally binding. Well, and the reason, it's not that he had it inserted, it's that the ordinance requires it. And so because the ordinance requires it, whether we have a policy or whether it's in the agreement, they have to, because they agreed to comply. That's a condition of the application. They're going to comply with the ordinance. They just feel like the Forest Service has been pre-approved. And on the definition of eligible recipient, the Forest Service is clearly an eligible recipient. So it's not like the board, I
As
think.
long as it's used, my whole thing is all along, as long as it was used for conservation purposes, any party could be a recipient.
Well, it has
It's
to
not-
be an eligible recipient, so it has to be a 501c3 doing it, or a county, or state, or national entity, or whose purpose is the preservation and conservation of land.
As long as it doesn't have a conservation easement on it, or,
Yes. Well,
because if it has a conservation easement placed on it and I go up there and want to buy it, am I not an owner?
okay, what they have to get approved is the interest we funded. So
Okay.
if Upstate Forever wanted to transfer a conservation easement to Soil and Water, they would have to come ask for permission
Okay.
on the conservation easement. But for the property, the Lyles Estate property, which is the property we're talking about up on Rocky Gap Road in Mountain Rest, they asked for funding of fee simple. They withdrew the request for a conservation easement, changed it to a fee simple request, and increased how much money they were gonna get, I think. But anyway.
Substantially.
Yes, substantially. So it is by far the largest grant that this board has ever issued. So that is, and I think it kind of boils down to their position is the board knew all along the plan was to transfer it to the Forest Service. Why should they have to come apply for approval of that transfer? And I understand that David's position is because the ordinance says so.
So it
Okay.
really ought to be a simple process.
Yes.
Because we
Sounds
knew
like we have a
up
legal
front,
dispute.
we knew
Yeah.
up front that they
Yeah.
were gonna do that, and we approved it. So it
yeah.
ought to be something, and we need to make it something very simple.
Right, and so that's where we are. And again, David said to me, Emily, you need to get these policies very, very, very simple. I said, okay, I hear you, David, and I see the consequence of it not being simple.
Can an attorney do that? Make it simple?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yes.
Strike that from the record. That is not for the record.
So until this is resolved, though, they can't really transfer it to the USFS. And to be honest, that was not an original, like, it was not clearly the Forest Service as a recipient.
It was, we hope.
Yeah, but like,
If
there were discussions about public use,
Uh-huh.
about there being access and stuff like that. But I think where we really got startled and scared is because one of the main reasons that they proposed this whole project was the preservation of Whetstone Creek, and then we find out after the fact that the Forest Service is, rumored to be considering a dove field right by the creek. So
And-
that's where it all like.
And
Oh,
that's,
God.
and that's the part of, I think, that brought home. I have always been concerned about the lack of monitoring of a fee simple grant. This board doesn't have the mechanism, the county doesn't have the personnel. And if there's no conservation easement, it's just conservation purposes. Well, what's conservation purposes?
Yep.
For another piece of property, having a dove field, and in fact, having it for recreational purposes, maintaining it, no development is conservation purposes. And we don't get to say, this board cannot say what they do with the property unless is not a conservation purpose, unless, if they started putting buildings on it, the board would be in a position to recommend to the county that the county initiate legal action. But the board is not in the business of telling property owners what they do. The conservation easements provide all that guidance. And so I know that Natural Land Trust functions very differently from Upstate Forever and Soil and Water. And they serve a very good purpose in terms of being able to purchase properties like this and hold it until it can be transferred. But it's the same thing. They file an application for a request to have this approved, this transfer approved. We look at, is it an eligible recipient? And I think we do have the power, if it's an unknown eligible recipient, it's a new land trust that we've never heard of or something, to say we need documentation so that we know that you meet the criteria of an eligible recipient in the ordinance, financial ability, management abilities, that kind of thing. But with Forest Service, that's not an issue. It would be like if they were going to transfer to TNC, that, the Nature Conservancy that both holds easements and owns land. I think we would ask for minimal information from the Nature Conservancy as to their qualifications to be a eligible recipient. So that is the reason we have the motion and the second on the table. Is there any other questions, any other discussion?
So the motion
Is to adopt what was in the backup, those changes.
I thought we already did that.
No, I made the motion.
Okay, but I thought we were on the,
We're on the
The
application.
okay.
No. Oh, no, are we?
We're on the transfer.
005.
Yeah, I thought it was
Oh.
move 00.
Oh,
and
thank
request
you.
for approval. You wanted to vacate that.
Oh, okay, we are on that. Thank
Okay.
you, Laura.
Sorry.
Okay, we're going faster than I thought. I think it's because, who knows? So, if there's no more discussion, do we have a vote? All in favor say aye.
It's the
It's to vacate.
Vacate
policy 005.
Five,
And the request.
and the form request for approval to transfer property interest.
Okay.
Okay. Everybody in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? None opposed. The motion passes unanimously. Okay. Thank you for keeping me straight there. And that kind of rolled into the discussion of the status of the Natural Land Trust letter. I did send a letter to the Natural Land Trust, which the board had voted on several months ago, but Andy had simply not done before he left. And that is what had prompted them to raise the issues that I just mentioned. So they have gotten that letter, and I will do a check with David Root and Mac about the status of that, and let Mac know that the policy has been vacated. And the letter you got is what I had drafted to send to them. But I would like to make a motion that we send this same letter with attachments to other grant recipients. Ask Jennifer to do that. So that everybody knows. Well, no, let's wait until we have a new 005.
That's what I was about to
I
say.
withdraw
because-
that motion.
Yeah, we just vacated it and it's
Yeah.
referenced in the second paragraph.
Yeah, I just saw that, okay. Once we get a new, okay. So the next thing is an update on the status of the OCCB vacant seats. Have we gotten any applications? Has anybody had any conversations with anyone who might be interested in applying?
What was that you just had on the screen from Hal Welch?
Oh, that's the, where the publisher's affidavit, I have to put that in every back.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. So, folks, it's September. We need to have these applications for the January meeting. Jennifer, can you remind us which, well, here, District 4 is vacant, and we have one at-large. So the at-large can be anybody in the county, doesn't matter. There's going to be somebody else on the board from that same district, such as myself, an at-large member. So please continue to try to recruit folks for those positions. And before we adjourn, let me remind everybody that the next meeting is Tuesday, November the 15th at 9 a.m. And so please mark your calendars and make every effort to be here so we can have the quorum. Okay,
You said Tuesday,
November the 15th,
15th, okay.
yeah. Okay, so do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, motion by Laura, second by Ryan,
Yes.
and all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, it's unanimous, and we're adjourned.